Coming up on this episode, Jonathan Kuminga is doing what the Warriors didn't think possible so shortly after trading him at February's mid-season deadline, plus the latest updates on Steve Kerr and rumoured potential replacements for the four-time championship winning coach. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. When the Warriors traded Jonathan Kuminga along with Buddy Hield to the Atlanta Hawks for Kristaps Porzingis at February's mid-season deadline, they would have acknowledged there was a chance that Kuminga could force them into regretting making that move. However, they would not have expected this from the young forward who's now delivering major playoff impact to the Atlanta Hawks. When the Warriors traded Kuminga to the Hawks, Atlanta were 10th in the Eastern Conference. The Warriors acknowledged that Kuminga needed to be moved to a team that was younger, perhaps rebuilding slightly, or at least building on the way up, and weren't necessarily so close to not just playoff action, but actually meaningful playoff basketball where they could win a series or two. Atlanta instead are now 2-1 up in their first round series against the much more favoured New York Knicks after a stunning 1-point victory in Game 3 that followed an equally remarkable comeback victory in Game 2 at Madison Square Garden. And what Kuminga's done over the last two games is quite astonishing. Again, the Warriors would have potentially foreseen that, hey, this guy could become a very influential playoff factor in some time. Again, they trade him to the Hawks. They think Atlanta, probably not being 10th in the Eastern Conference at the time, probably not going to be a playoff team this season. Instead, they go on a massive run and do make the playoffs. Even then, they would have thought, okay, could Atlanta really trouble the Knicks in the first round? Probably going to be a sweep, maybe a gentleman's sweep. Now, it's going at least 6 games, and then the Hawks might actually be the favourites to win this series. And if they can beat the Knicks, then who knows what they could potentially do moving forward. Kuminga's impact here over the past 2 games cannot be understated. And the biggest factor is the fact that Atlanta are winning. Of course, Kuminga averaged over 24 points, shot over 55% from the floor in Golden State's last 4 or final 4 playoff games last year against the Minnesota Timberwolves in the second round. Kuminga was excellent. I was very impressed with his performances throughout that period after Stephen Curry suffered his hamstring injury. But guess what? The Warriors didn't win a single game. Kuminga played or appeared in 8 playoff games for the Warriors last season. He had a positive plus-minus in 1 of those games. So as impressive as the numbers were, I thought he's fantastic. Certainly the biggest positive from those final 4 games. It didn't matter. Golden State didn't win a game. They didn't afford Steph Curry the chance to return from that hamstring injury, which he possibly could have done had the series been extended to at least a Game 6. Now, Kuminga's putting up pretty similar numbers, it must be said, but the impact is so much more meaningful because Atlanta have won these last 2 games. Not only that, but Kuminga's doing it in the biggest moments. Throughout the last 2 games, of the possible 24 fourth quarter minutes, he's played all but 30 seconds. He played all 12 fourth quarter minutes at MSG in Game 2, scored 7 points, had some huge plays, a couple of big rebounds against Karl Anthony Towns, had the emphatic block on Jalen Brunson in the closing minutes. Sure, it's like CJ McCollum, Jalen Johnson making plays down the stretch to kind of close things out for Atlanta. But Kuminga's impact is still remarkable and quite stunning. And again, nothing that the Warriors would have foreseen coming this soon after the trade. Sure, maybe next year, maybe a few years down the track. Of course, he's only 23 years old. It was probably going to happen at some point in his career, but meaningful basketball in the playoffs, impacting winning, is not what the Warriors expected Jonathan Kuminga to be doing this year. Played all but 30 seconds of the fourth quarter in Game 3, scored 6 points, big basket combining with Johnson down the stretch, big offensive putback layup, big offensive strong rebound into a putback lefty layup in the fourth quarter. Says a lot about Quinn Snyder and how Atlanta are viewing Kuminga. Is he's still coming off the bench. This is still a 6th man. He's not yet moved into starting role. He started 1 game for the Hawks since February's trade. But he's playing starter minutes. Played 35 in Game 2, played 28 in Game 3, And more importantly for him, I think the concern and the relationship issue with Steve Kerr at times in the past with the Warriors wasn't necessarily to do with the number of minutes he was playing, but the lack of trust and faith that Steve had him in the biggest moments down the stretch of games. Close game, 1 or 2 possession, few minutes left. Kuminga often stapled to the bench in those situations. Now we're seeing the opposite. He's actually playing most of his minutes in the fourth quarter. Again, all but 30 seconds of a possible 24 minutes over the past 2 games. So the Warriors, Mike Dunleavy Jr., who obviously made the trade, Joe Lacob, and Lacob would be, I'd like to be a fly on the wall in his lounge room watching some of these games, watching these past couple of games, because he was obviously a huge fan of Kuminga. He was the one person in the organization who backed him strongly. And if not for Joe Lacob as the owner, Kuminga could have easily been moved a couple of years ago, when he probably, in hindsight, should have been moved when he had far more value. But nevertheless, Joe Lacob might be looking around thinking, told you. What does it mean for Steve Kerr's future as coach when Kuminga's having these performances like this? Does Steve want to come back and coach because of it? Does he not want to because of it? I don't think it necessarily plays a role in Steve Kerr's future, but it's interesting nonetheless. And I can sit here for hours. We, as Warrior fans, could sit around a table collectively for hours and talk about our Jonathan Kuminga opinions, right? And what we think of him, what we made of his Warriors tenure, what we think of these playoff games, everything else. The reality is that what we think as fans and analysing the game means nothing to the Warriors front office, to Joe Lacob, to Mike Dunleavy Jr. And therefore, when I'm thinking about this solely from their point of view, disregard what I think, disregard what you think. When I'm thinking about it purely from their point of view, they would have thought making this trade, sure, JK could make us regret this down the track. But to truly regret a move, a player's got to deliver in the playoffs. He's got to help his team win in the playoffs. That's what I always said. And I was of the opinion, and understandably, I think the Warriors were too, like, hey, the Hawks are 10th. It's going to be a while until we see Kuminga not leading, but impacting and helping playoff victories for Atlanta. And now we're seeing it a few months after the trade. It's quite astonishing. What I will say about JK that I think, largely always said, and it's been a hindrance to him at times, but I think I've always been impressed with his ability to meet the biggest moments. He's not always had that opportunity with the Warriors under Steve Kerr. But when he has had the opportunity, he generally steps up. Or at least he tries to. He embraces the big moments. He wants to impact the big moments, which compared to other young players, like some people have that, some NBA players have that, and some don't, right? And so it's not shocking that he's making big impact in fourth quarters and in big playoff games, to me, because he is a guy that wants to impact at a higher level, who isn't going to necessarily shy away from a big moment to make a big play or anything like that. If you want like a comparison, remember earlier this season when Quentin Post, was it against Minnesota or I can't remember who it was against, but it was at Chase Center. He was wide open in the corner. Jimmy Butler drove, kicked it out, found him, and QP had a chance to take a wide open corner three that would have given the Warriors the lead, I think, with about 60 seconds left. Wasn't at the buzzer or anything like that, but late in the game. And he hesitated completely, almost froze, allowed the defender to come out and like semi-contest, and he missed the three. And that to me is a sign of someone that doesn't want to embrace the biggest moments, is hesitating in the biggest moments. Thinks, okay, should I defer to my veteran teammates in this scenario? I don't think I ever got that from Kuminga, right? If anything, it was like trying to bring him back to, hey, some of the decision-making here, you're trying to do it yourself in moments where you shouldn't, where you should actually defer to your teammates, because there should be a time for that. And it was about trying to rein that in, essentially. But I'd much rather have a player who's confident and embraces the biggest moments than a player that's scared of it and is the opposite. So we can say whatever we want about JK. I just want to give him some credit for how he's played over the past couple of games. We'll see if it can continue moving forward, because these are 2 games at the end of the day. And Jonathan Kuminga's had great stretches of 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 games throughout his whole career. He really has. Can he string this together now? Can he help the Hawks through the first round against the Knicks? And again, if they can get past the Knicks, who knows what could happen going forward. Let me know your thoughts on Jonathan Kuminga, his impact in the playoffs so far with the Hawks. Again, I think the Warriors certainly wouldn't have thought that they'd be regretting it this quickly, and that Jonathan Kuminga would be making this kind of impact in the playoffs so quickly for the Hawks. ESPN's Anthony Slater provided us an update of Steve Kerr's future on Thursday, and I've seen some very interesting, fascinating names doing the rounds on social media and suggestions on who could replace Steve Kerr if he is to depart the Warriors. Slater reported on Thursday that there is not expected to be a decision to be made on Kerr's future until next week at the absolute earliest. I continue to be really interested on the timeline of this in comparison to the NBA draft lottery, which is May 10, which is now only a couple of weeks away. If you're Steve Kerr, if you're the Warriors, is it worth waiting before we get a final decision on whether Steve's walking or staying? Is it worth waiting to see the outcome of the draft lottery? Because if you suddenly jump into a top 4 pick and you are adamant, as Joe Lacob, that you want a future franchise superstar, we are keeping that pick. We are not trading it under really any circumstances, even if Giannis Antetokounmpo becomes available. That's the case. Steve might be like, all right, I'm out of here. Okay, I don't want to, as fun as it might be to try and develop an 18, 19, 20-year-old coming in as a top 4 pick, whoever it may be, that's not what I want to do. Okay, I'm trying to win a championship. We've seen that. We've seen that in his inability, or this reputation, I suppose, that he's been unable to develop young talent over the past few years, because the Warriors have been trying to contend for championships for the entirety of the last dozen years, essentially, outside of maybe 2019-20. If they retain the 11th overall pick, let's say, does that make him feel more comfortable about staying? Because it's like, all right, maybe we still keep the pick, but we're probably bringing in a guy who's going to be a potentially nice rotation piece, but isn't going to be necessarily viewed as like this face of the franchise moving forward after the Stephen Curry era. So I do wonder whether it's worth Steve and Joe as owner, Mike Dunleavy Jr., the people involved in making this decision. I do wonder whether it's worth waiting on the draft lottery and just see what happens then, and basically you're just giving yourself more information to play with, and I don't see what the harm in that is. Of course, there's got to be a decision shortly after that, because you can't have a situation where your head coaching position is up in the air and uncertain when free agency hits and you're looking to make trades and you're looking to sign veteran players. That's going to be the big thing to me, is like, you need to solidify what you're doing, because the roster has to be in step with the head coach that you have, right? They have to be in tune with one another. And the Warriors are kind of fortunate in a way. It's a blessing and a curse. In a way, the fact they have only 6 contracted players currently on their roster for next season is a curse, because there's so many decisions to be made. And if you also need to find a new head coach, like, there's a lot going on. And therefore, if there's a lot going on and you kind of panic a little bit because you kind of got to make decisions by free agency and stuff like that, then there's a chance that things could go wrong. I understand that. It's also a blessing, because it's like, well, if Steve does leave and we bring in another coach, we can actually, because we've only got 6 contracted guys, we can actually get some influence from that coach. We can actually build a roster that this coach likes and might actually be more in tune to that guy rather than Steve. right? Instead of having, they could have 10, 11 guys contracted for next season. And then whoever comes in is kind of stuck with the roster that they've gotten that Steve left. So it's a blessing and curse in some ways. But there's no doubt the Warriors will have to make a decision. Steve will have to make a decision in the next couple of weeks. I do just wonder if they could wait until the draft lottery and see the outcome of that. In terms of some of the replacements that we've heard, some really interesting ones brought forward by Tim Kawakami of the San Francisco Standard, which went quite viral on social media and didn't made the what Kawakami said and the reports sound more valid and true than what they actually were. Start with Todd Golden, who's obviously been at Florida championship, NCAA championship winner with Florida last year. Will Richard, part of that team as well as former recent first round pick Walter Clayton Jr. I think if the Warriors, I do have question marks about the Warriors going through the college ranks to find a new head coach. That would signal that they want to potentially reset and rebuild a little bit and get some more younger developing talent in. If you're Steph Curry, how happy are you going to be if you are being coached next to you by an untried, unproven college coach or anyone that just doesn't have any head coaching experience at NBA level? Like, how happy are you going to be with that? Not only do you have to build a relationship with them, but obviously they are there trying to prove themselves as an NBA head coach. You still, as Steph Curry, want to be in some kind of deep playoff contention next season. Again, talking about the roster, like the Warriors have already been linked this offseason to guys like Giannis, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James. Is that going to go out the door? Is that going to be slammed shut if the Warriors suddenly get an unproven guy? Because you bring in a guy like Todd Golden or whoever, it doesn't matter if they come from college or they're a long-time assistant coach in the NBA. If this is your first NBA coaching experience, there is already enough pressure that is going to be on you with a 38-year-old Stephen Curry and trying to maximize and prioritize the remaining years of his prime. Are you really going to be that comfortable? Imagine the pressure if you're also adding LeBron James and a potential farewell tour to the Knicks, or Giannis or Kawhi Leonard, who are on their own timeline of trying to win another championship. So, again, this is why it's the roster and the head coach, like it has to be in tune, because I'm just not sure if the Warriors bring in a completely inexperienced guy. I'm not sure they're necessarily going to go down the path of adding another star player and another big name to the locker room, big voice to the locker room. And at the same time, if you're Giannis or you're LeBron or you're Kawhi, are you going to want to go to a Warrior team that's now being coached by Todd Golden or some kind of inexperienced coach from an NBA standpoint? I think the desire to join the Warriors in that situation would be far less, which is also potentially why it's important for Steve Kerr to return. As much as you want to say about Steve's coaching and the X's and the O's and stuff like that, I think he's a good manager of people and a good manager of players. I think he has the respect of 99% of players. I think if he's still there, there's far more chance that a LeBron James would be willing to leave the Lakers for the Warriors in free agency, which the way the Lakers are playing in the playoffs so far, I would consider unlikely. I don't know why LeBron would necessarily leave the Lakers to come to the Warriors. But again, maybe the Steph Curry factor is always going to be there. The potential and the desire of playing with Steph Curry is always going to be the number one. But that might not be enough if suddenly Steve Kerr's out the door and you get an inexperienced head coach in. So I'm fascinated to see what happens if they do go down the untried route. A couple of others that have been mentioned. Mike Brown, former assistant, obviously longtime assistant of the Warriors before he took up the head coaching role in Sacramento, got unfairly fired there. Now in New York in his first year. Unlikely that Mike Brown gets sacked after year one, but hello, if this Knicks meltdown continues against the Hawks and they are eliminated by Atlanta in round one, I don't know. Anything could happen. Maybe Mike Brown's out after 1 year in New York. Maybe. I find it unlikely, but if they were to lose this series 4-2 or something, it could be a genuine possibility. So does Mike Brown actually become more realistic than what we might give it credit for right now? Yes. If New York lose in the first round against Atlanta, it does. Should the Warriors go after Mike Brown? If Sacramento and then New York were to move on from Mike Brown basically very quickly after one another, does that really scream, oh yeah, we want to take a chance on this guy? The one thing I would say with Mike Brown is he does have the relationship with Draymond and with Steph. So it's not as if it's an untried coach who would have to come in and build relationships with those guys and command the respect of those guys. Mike Brown would have that. So it's something to monitor, particularly if the Knicks were to fall to the Hawks here. The other one, perhaps the one that did the rounds the most on social media, was Andre Iguodala, which I was like, huh? And I just saw it on socials, on Twitter. Tim Kawakami is reporting that Andre Iguodala is a name to watch as a potential replacement for Steve Kerr. That's not necessarily the case. Kawakami suggested Iguodala as the out of the envelope, out of the box candidate, not as one that the Warriors are definitely looking at or that is any kind of likelihood of being a replacement for Steve Kerr. It is nonetheless interesting. When I hear it, I'm like, huh? Surely not. That sounds ridiculous. The more I think about it, though, the more I'm like, it's not as crazy as you might think. The reason I say that is because, look how JJ Redick is flat out coaching Ime Udoka through the first 2 games of the first round series between the Lakers and the Rockets. And there's some pretty eerie similarities between JJ Redick and Andre Iguodala in terms of if Iggy was to be hired as head coach of the Warriors this offseason. Obviously, there's beyond the absolutely no head coaching, no assistant coaching experience, no coaching experience whatsoever before being hired. That's the obvious factor. There's also a timing element to this, which when JJ Redick was hired in 2024 by the Lakers, he was 3 years removed from his playing days. He retired in 2021. Guess what? Andre Iguodala retired in 2023. If he was to become head coach in 2026, that's 3 years removed from being a player. And perhaps the biggest element of this is the driving force is, or would be in Iggy's case, their relationship with the superstar of the franchise. LeBron James might not be the superstar of the franchise right now, given the Luka trade over 12 months ago. But at the time in 2024, I think there was no illusions that JJ Redick got this job in large part thanks to his relationship with LeBron James. And again, if Andre Iguodala was to get this role with the Warriors, it would largely stem from his relationship with Steph Curry. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And again, Iggy, completely unproven as a head coach, completely unproven as a coach in general. But at least in comparison to someone outside the organization, a Todd Golden, someone from the college ranks or whatever else, at least that he would already have the respect of Steph and Draymond. He would already command that because he's got such a great relationship with those two guys from their playing days together and winning 4 championships together. So, as crazy as it sounds, Andre Iguodala as head coach of the Golden State Warriors, as crazy as that sounds, perhaps JJ Redick is proof that it's not as wild as you first think when you just read that. So let me know, what do you think will happen with Steve Kerr's future? And if Steve Kerr is to depart the Warriors, who do you think will replace him as head coach? Gonna leave it there, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. Follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. Golden State with Mates on Instagram and TikTok as well. I'll see you on the next episode.